Welcome to the Putnam County Library Lunch and Learn. Today we are joined by Daniel Graves, certified flight instructor, who will be talking about what it takes to become a commercial pilot. Take it away, Daniel.
Hi, thank you, Spencer. So today we're going to be going over what a lot of people come in the industry going, they call it zero to hero. It's going from zero time all the way towards you're going to be going to, if you eventually want to work for a commercial airline. We're gonna cut off at commercial pilot, which a lot of people tend to confuse and think that it's the same thing, that a commercial. So in aviation, everybody outside calls it a pilot's license, but I'm gonna start saying pilot certificate. I might go back and forth interchangeably, but the official term is a certificate. So there is a difference between a commercial certificate and an airline certificate. It's called an airline transport pilot certificate, or ATP. And so we're gonna I'll go a little bit into that stuff, but mostly cutting it at commercial certificate, and I'll explain why when we get there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. For those that are coming in online, you can go ahead and comment and we'll try to get those questions answered. We'll go ahead and get started here. All right, so before going into those things, I'm gonna go over some first steps. Things that you need to do. What I recommend is, before doing any of these other things, because they do cost a bit of money, is I recommend taking a discovery flight. Depending on where you go, some of them offer a decent rate, or might be regular, but it's usually about an hour long. Where you go up, they usually let you take the controls, and you can kind of see what it's like, and then you can make a decision of, yes, I love this, I want to keep going. Or there's some people that think, oh, this is my dream. They go up and do a discovery flight, and then they realize, oh, I did not like that. And it's better to find out before you go and buy all of your materials and supplies and spend all that money. And so I recommend, taking a discovery or intro flight, as they're also called. It's just, usually just an hour-long flight lesson. You go up, you get to fly around. Usually they'll let you see something kind of cool. If there's a cool terrain feature in the area nearby or something, or if you live nearby, you can usually fly over your house or something. And it's a really fun experience. Even if you don't plan on becoming a pilot, you can always sign up for a discovery flight and just do it once, so you can check that off your bucket list. Say, yeah, I flew an airplane. After taking a discovery flight and you decide, yep, this is for me, I recommend, if you're planning on going further than just your private pilot certificate and you want to eventually turn around, is get your medical certificate taken care of early. There are three types. You have a first class, which, as we can see here on the PowerPoint, is required for the airline transport pilot certificate. So if you're applying for them, you have to have that one. It's a little more costly and it's a little more rigorous what they screen for. But if that's your end goal, it'd be nice to know that you can in fact get that before you do all your training and then find out that medically you can't even do this as a career. The second class medical certificate is for people that are going to be exercising the privileges of a commercial pilot certificate. So that would be not transporting people, but a commercial pilot certificate allows you to be compensated for flight. You can get a job. They have small things such as like aerial surveying, like skydiving operations, banner towing, that sort of thing, where you can get a job where you're not carrying necessarily passengers on a scheduled flights such as that. Third class, it would be basically private pilot privileges. That's you just want to go up with your family or something, you're taking them up, you need to have at least a third class. So usually a little bit cheaper to get your third class medical certificate, and so that's all that's required for any of these training things that you would do. However, if you are planning on going further, it is nice to just know that you have it. This kind of shows how long it's good for. If you are over 40, then it's kind of what we see here is in the blue. If you're under 40, it's what's in the red. Your first class, if you get that one and you're over 40, it's good for 6 months, and then it will, for the next 6 months, so up to 12 months, it would be a second class privileges are what you're able to exercise. And then after that, it's good up to, 24 months for the third class privileges. So if you are working for an airline and you're over 40, you have to go and get that renewed, go see the doctor and get that renewed every 6 months. If you're over 40, it's every 12 months. Anyway, but just something to look into. Then some other things that you might want to look into getting, if you decide this is something for you, is you want to get a logbook. That way you can go back and get that discovery flight put in there, because you got to keep track of all your hours. You got to log them, because that's what a lot of this that we're going to be going over today is the hour requirements, what you have to do in order to get each of your certificates. So you want to have that logbook. There are different ones that you can find online. Some are cheaper, some are more expensive. Not all logbooks are the same. They have different information, what they take. I personally like the, it's called the ASA standard. This was my logbook. You can see it here. It's just because of the fields that it asks for inside here are very handy. I've seen some where they have the same information, but the layout was different, but it's just personal preference. It doesn't necessarily matter which logbook you get, but as long as you get one, you can start recording that time. Even the discovery flight is loggable. Then headset. So this is a fun one. I've had people ask me, they say, what do you recommend for a headset? I don't recommend a headset because I let people make that decision themselves. I had a student who, it was an over $1,000 headset that had Bluetooth capabilities, active noise canceling, so he had to replace the batteries when it would die. Really nice headset. And he said that he was given the advice to get a really nice one, and then it would be the only headset he'd ever need throughout his career, which sounds, solid. I didn't know when I was getting mine. I didn't want to go spend $1,000 on a headset that somebody, I might later find out, they say that's terrible. Why did you spend all that money on that terrible headset? So I got the cheapest headset I could find. It was $89 online. And I've had it for, years now. It does me just fine. It just has the noise canceling of itself. There's no active noise canceling, no batteries required. It works fine for a few hours of flying, but when I have done some of the longer flights that are over 4 hours around that time, it does kind of start to hurt on my ears a little bit. So maybe one of those nicer ones would be handy. So it's just your preference again, as you can see here, of if that's an important thing to you, that you want it to be very comfortable, you want to have all those extra features, you can go ahead and spend that money on those. Or you can save your money and get a cheaper one. Again, that's up to you. Another thing would be textbooks that you want to get. They do have digital copies or they have physical copies. I've got here, it's the FAR AIM, so that's the Federal Aviation Regulations. And the AIM is the Aeronautical Information Manual. This was the one I had when I was going through school. It's a little outdated now. It says it's 2023, so technically I need to get a new one if I was going to be using it for an exam. However, I like to keep this one because it's got, as you can see, all of these tab marks on here. I've gone through and I've highlighted sections that were important that I need to look up, and I am constantly using this. Whenever somebody has a question, I'm like, oh, I know where to find that. That's going to be over in this area, and I can usually find it by flipping within a couple of pages. I've got the spot that I need to look for. That's one of the benefits of having a physical one, whereas the digital ones, you can usually search through them fairly easily, and a lot of them that you can buy, the digital copies, they will update them when the new one comes out each year, so then you don't have to buy a whole new book each time. So that's personal preference. When it came time during one of my exams, it was nice having this right there on hand, knowing exactly how to get to something quickly so that it looked a little more put together rather than trying to search something up on like my phone or iPad. But again, it's all personal preference. I know other people that just use the digital versions and they swear by it. I'm most likely going to be going that way eventually, but for now, this is what I like. They have other textbooks as well that are great for studying and learning things. Then one of the last things here I'll put of materials that you'd need would be, I use an iPad, but they do have like paper charts and stuff if you want to go old school. Personally, I like to use the technology. It makes life so much easier, so why not take off some of that workload that we have? Things get complicated enough in the air. So I use a program called ForeFlight. You can see here, it's got the same chart just like a paper chart would be, and I can strap it right to my knee using this knee board that I got online. I just strap it on here, and while I'm flying, as I'm sitting, I can just check all of my charts, and it updates it every time I'm connected to the internet. And so it's very handy knowing exactly what airspace I'm going to be flying into, what I'm dealing with, being able to navigate, and using the GPS that's on it, I know exactly where I am, whereas a paper chart, I don't. That being said, it's not required. You can use paper charts and plot it all out using pen and paper, and there are people that do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Preference, I like to use the technology that's available. They have different things online. This was kind of, again, I like to save money personally, but this was a cheaper one using ADSB. Just has a power bank and a little Raspberry Pi, and so it's uses the transponder in the plane, so it's able to locate other planes that are in the air, and I connect it to my iPad. So when I'm flying, I have traffic right there. I can see other planes on the map in real time, so I know if I'm flying towards someone, I can use it for safety. I also am looking outside all of the time looking for them, but it kind of helps with that situational awareness. They have, more expensive ones that are better. But again, not required, but just some handy things that we've got that are available to us. All right, now moving on to what we actually were probably planning on seeing here. All right, the first certificate you will get on your journey will be your student pilot certificate. Now, this is not required when you do a discovery flight or even for initial flight training. It is required before you can solo fly, however. And so, before you can go fly solo, you gotta get this where you'll sign up for it. Most people use the online system that the FAA has, the Federal Aviation Administration. Real quick, in aviation, we kind of have our own language. We use a lot of acronyms and other terms. And if I say anything that you're like, I have no idea what that means, feel free to just ask and say, what does that mean? If you don't know, because I tend to forget that not everybody knows these terms sometimes, and so if I do that, I apologize. I've tried in my presentation to kind of make things simple and not use too much of that jargon, but I may slip up, and so I apologize. So as part of that, the FAA, as I was saying, requires this. We have all of these things are written. I'm going to be referencing these little numbers. That 61.83. That is the legal code here in the Code of Regulations. You go to, Part 61, Section 83, and that's what you'll find for student pilots. And the requirements that are there to be eligible for a student pilot certificate, you must be at least 16 years old. However, that doesn't mean you have to be 16 years old to start your flight training. You can start flight training at any age. You just have to be 16 before you get your student pilot certificate, which you have to have before you can fly solo. For example, my 3-year-old daughter has started her flight training. She's logged in. She has a logbook, just like mine. I brought her headset to kind of show. She likes it. She got a pink one. It's the same as mine, just it's smaller, so it fits for a kid. And she loves pink, so I got her a pink one. And so flying is for any age. Not just for people our age, not just for adults, but kids fly too, and she loves it. I've got some pictures. I should have included a picture of her flying on here. I apologize. But the only real requirements they have to get your student pilot certificate are that you are at least 16 years of age and that you can read, speak, write, and understand English. Now you're gonna see that when I go to each of these things, a lot of these repeat. I'll kind of shorten that to just saying know English. You need to know English instead of reading the whole thing, but they have the legal speak where they have all these full things. I'm gonna start shortening some of it to make it a little easier. So that's all it is for a student pilot certificate. Once you do that and you can solo, then you're working towards getting your private pilot certificate, the only one you really have to earn. Well, not the only one, excuse me, the first one that you really have to earn. The student pilot one, anyone can just go sign up for it pretty much. For your private pilot certificate, in order to be eligible, you have to be at least 17 years old. So you can start doing that stuff, start solo flying at 16, but then before you can go and take, so I have it written here, you have the practical exam, it's known as a check ride. And so you go take the check ride, that's with an FAA examiner. There consists of an oral portion. Typically, they're around 2 hours. Some are a little shorter, some might go a little longer. It's typically 2 hours of them talking with you and doing a ground, and then you'll go up and fly, and that's usually on average around 2 hours as well. Again, that can go a little faster, or it can take a little longer depending on different factors. But so usually you plan on about 4 to 5 hours for the check ride. because you might take a break in the middle there, take bathroom breaks, but about 2 hours on the ground, 2 hours in the air. And so in order to qualify to be able to go take the check ride, which you have to pass to get your certificate, you have to be at least 17 years old, you have to know English, you have to, before doing this, you have to have been endorsed to take a written knowledge exam, and then you have to go and pass that knowledge exam. You have to have received flight training, and you have to meet the aeronautical experience, which I'll cover in the next slide, and then you have to pass the check ride. Once you do all that and you get your private pilot certificate, or private pilot's license as most people call it, you can then, this is what your privileges and limitations are, is that I found in that legal code of 61-113, is that you can now act as the pilot in command, which I will be using as PIC. That's the term that you'll always hear in aviation, PIC, the pilot in command. So when you're flying with your instructor that whole first time, he's the pilot in command, even though you're the one flying it. The only time you're logging PIC is when you are flying solo or after you get your pilot certificate. But now once you get it, you can now take the plane, you can go up with somebody, with a friend, and you are the pilot in command of the plane, but you cannot fly for compensation or hire. There are a few exceptions that are listed in there, but I'm not gonna go into that today. That would be something that you'll go over if you start flight training. But there are some little exceptions here and there, but those are your privileges and limitations. Privilege is that you can now act as pilot in command. Limitation, not for compensation or hire. All right, now we got the aeronautical experience. Ooh, that's a good looking guy we got in that picture there.
I wonder who that is.
So I include that one because that's a picture of, that's kind of what it looks like when you get your private pilot certificate. You're gonna be flying smaller planes typically. I mean, you can go and add a multi-engine rating onto your private pilot certificate, but not to go too confusing right now. It's usually, think, general aviation, smaller. That's typically what it's gonna be. So in order to qualify for that check ride, as we saw, you had to have those that aeronautical experience. This is the breakdown of flight time that you have to have. You have to have at least 40 hours total flight time that you've logged in your logbook. Of those 40 hours, we got to break down. There's 20 and there's 10 that have to be certain things. Of those 40 hours, 10 of them have to be flight training, which we refer to as dual, because it's you and an instructor. So there's dual time. So it has to be flight training. Of those 20 hours of flight training, we break it down even further, you have to have at least 3 hours of cross-country training. You have to have logged at least 3 hours of night flying training. Of those 3 hours of night flying training, you have to have done at least one cross-country flight over 100 nautical miles, and you have to have performed at least 10 full-stop takeoff and landing. So when we say full stop, what that means is when you land, it's not what's called a touch and go, where you just touch down to the runway and then keep going. You have to completely stop the plane, so full stop. TOL stands for takeoff and landing at an airport. So if you happen to have like your own little grass strip at your yard, like you can't use that. It's got to be at an airport. And you have to do those 10 at night that you got to log. Another of those 20 hours of training, you have to have at least 3 hours of instrument training, which is where you fly solely by reference to instruments. It's where they have what's called a view limiting device. They'll have foggles or some other sort of a hood, where usually it's like glass or something you put on that makes it so it limits what you can see, pretty much so you're just looking at the instruments. It's not a whole lot, just basic things that you have to have there for 3 hours. And then you have to have, of those 20 hours, at least 3 hours of what we call check ride prep. That is 3 hours within the 2 months before you go and take the check ride of training to prepare you for the practical exam. Then we go back to, of those 40 hours, at least 10 of them have to be solo hours. So that's where you're flying just you. No one else is in the plane, which seems kind of crazy. You don't have your pilot's license and yet you're going to be flying solo. It's very regulated. You have to have flown like any of the cross-country stuff. You fly the route with your instructor. They have to give you a little exam themselves before they can sign you off on these things. And there's more that you'll go into that. If you start training, you'll see all of that. But of those 10 hours, at least 5 of those hours need to be cross-country, which means you're flying, from one to another airport that's at least 50 nautical miles away. Of those cross-country hours, each of these you're going to see has what we call the long cross-country. So this one there, the long cross country that you do for your private pilot certificate, is one solo cross country over 150 nautical miles with full stop landings at 3 points. And so typically most people have a route that's a triangle. So you go at least 50 miles out, and then it can be more and then a little bit less, whatever comes in, but it just, as long as the whole thing is over 150 miles, then you're good there, and you did a landing where you came to a full stop while you were there. Then of those 10 hours of solo, you have to have done at least 3 full stop takeoffs and landings at an airport. All right, so you do all that, and you get your private, you go and you take the practical exam where they go over all of your ground knowledge. You go up and you do where you perform some maneuvers, and you pass and you get your private pilot certificate. You may notice from this, 20 hours and 10 hours only adds up to 30, and there's a 40 total. That's because depending on how you're performing, it's kind of up to you and your instructor of how you spend those other hours before you go. In fact, most people actually average around 50 to 60 hours before they actually go take the check ride to get their private pilot certificate, because even though you may have completed all of these things, there are other maneuvers that you have to be proficient at doing. Things that you'll practice, and if you can't do it within the standards that you're going to be tested on your check ride, then they're not going to sign off on you to go take the check ride. So once you get to that point of being able to proficiently do that, it is possible where in those extra 10 hours that you got there, you can do all of them just fine, and then you can go take the check ride right at 40 hours. Most people need a little more training, and it takes them a little longer. So don't be discouraged if that happens to be you. I've known some people where they went, almost to 100 hours before they took their check ride. It's different depending on each person. Then, once you pass that check ride, you can then start training on your next phase of your training. So you don't have to do this in order. There is a recommended order. You could start going towards a commercial pilot certificate at this point. Most people recommend going for your instrument rating due to the hour requirements, and it's more efficient with your time usually. Plus, I like an instrument rating. So when you get your private pilot certificate, that allows you to go fly in what we call VMC, Visual Meteorological Conditions, or when it's VFR, Visual Flight Rules, which means you can see out, everything's nice and visual. You're looking for other planes and you can avoid them so that you're not getting into an accident. You can see the airport that you're coming to land at so you can go and safely land. You're avoiding clouds. When you're flying in instrument flight rules, IFR, that means you might be flying through a cloud. How do you know if there's another plane that's in that cloud? If they don't have the same stuff as you, if you don't have the instruments, if I didn't have the thing here to be able to see where other planes are, I don't know. I might be like, oh, I'm going to go fly through that cloud. No. You only fly through clouds if you are on a flight plan, which means you are talking to air traffic control, and so they are telling you where to go. You file the area that you want to go to, and they usually will accept that route. You can ask to go, a specific area that you want to go to, but you are following their instructions. And so when you are in a cloud and can't see anything, you're going to be good because they are checking that anybody else that's in a cloud is talking to them, and so they're making sure nobody's going to hit. And so that keeps us safe. And so that's why it's important to have an instrument rating, but also because it gets very disorienting when you're in a plane. And so it's a lot safer when you actually fly. A lot of people think those 3 hours of instrument training that you receive for their private pilot certificate, it might seem like a lot when you're doing it, but it's a lot more that goes into it when you actually get the certificate. There's a lot of hour requirements that go in and a lot of other things you do. I personally had where I was on a flight plan, talking to ATC, they gave me a heading and we went into a cloud, and my instincts of what I felt, it felt like everything was good and I was going there, but because I knew to have a specific scan and not just look at one, which most people tend to do, they tend to just focus on 1 or 2 instruments. I had the full scan and I could see that not everything was correlating and that the plane was actually going into a pretty sharp turn away from where I was going into an area that could have been potentially dangerous. But because I had received that training, I was able to hold the plane and keep going. It was a little, at first for a moment, it was a little scary when I saw it, but then I was able to hold it and follow that training, and everything worked out just fine, and I'm here today. And so that's why we do it, is for safety reasons. And so even if somebody was only going to go as far as getting a private pilot certificate, I always recommend at least getting an instrument rating. That way, should you be up flying and it's a nice Sunday and out of nowhere clouds roll in and something happens, you at least have the training to stay safe. The requirements for this are found in 6165, and we're going to see it looks very similar to the other one with a couple of differences. This one, you have to have at least a private pilot certificate, because what it is it's not its own certificate, it's an add-on to your certificate. So if you have a private pilot certificate, then you add an instrument rating to that certificate. If you have a commercial pilot certificate, you can add an instrument rating to that certificate. And so you have to have at least a private pilot certificate to add this onto. You have to be able to read, write, speak, and understand English, so know English. You need to, again, just like all the other things, be able to go take the knowledge test and pass the knowledge test. You have to receive the flight training, meet the aeronautical experience, and pass the check ride. Oh, I thought I heard somebody coming in. All right, then we go on to our aeronautical experience. This is a picture, I took this picture here as well. There was two different pictures that was probably about 1 to 2 minutes apart, where the weather went from this, where you can see like there's some clouds out in the distance, but it looks pretty sunny day. You can see the ground and everything, and then just like that, completely there, I can barely see the end of my wingtip. And so that's why we want to have an instrument rating, because the weather can change pretty quickly. And it makes it so we can keep flying, if we have an instrument rating, rather than if we see that stuff's coming in, we have to go land. You can still get to your destination if you need to. The aeronautical experience, with this one, you're required to have at least 50 hours of cross-country PIC time, so cross-country pilot and command. And then another separate thing, you have to have at least 40 hours of actual or simulated instrument time. So whether you're with somebody that's instrument rated and you're flying with your instructor, that is, flying in actual, which would be this one right here, that's actual instrument conditions right there on the right. The other one would be you go up with the view limiting device, you're simulating instrument conditions. So you have to have at least 40 hours, however you make that up of those. Of those 40 hours, you're required to have at least 15 have to be with a instrument flight instructor. So there are some flight instructors that are not certified to teach instrument for your instrument rating. They can only teach you for like your private pilot certificate or other things like that, but they can't give instrument instruction. And so that's what we call a double I, a CFII, because CFI stands for Certified Flight Instructor, CFII, the extra I is for instrument. So at least 15 of those 40 hours have to be with a CFII. Of those 15 hours, you are required to have at least the 3 hours of check ride prep that we talked about, and the long cross country for this one. What it is, it's one cross country flight that you have to be filed. So you're talking to ATC on a filed flight plan, and it has to be at least 250 nautical miles. You have to perform an instrument approach at each airport you go to, and you have to at least fly 3 different kinds of approaches. And so that's all that's there for the instrument. Then there's certain types of things that you practice for, different types of approaches. That's stuff you'll go over in your training, things to do to prepare for that check ride. And then when you pass that check ride, similar, you're gonna have 2 hours on the ground, 2 hours in the air. Again, that time fluctuates. Some people say, oh, mine was only an hour, because they were able to fly it really fast. Some people might say, oh, well, mine took, 3 hours. Different for each person, but typically on average, expect about 2 on the ground, 2 in the air. And then when you pass that, you're ready to go to your next stage, which the recommended order is to then work towards your commercial pilot certificate, because once you build up these hours, it helps you towards your commercial, which has a much bigger hour requirement, which we'll get to in a second. So the eligibility for this one, 18 years old. You'll notice the instrument rating didn't have an age restriction, just that you have to have at least a private pilot certificate. So the age restriction you would say is 17, because that's how old you have to be to get your private pilot certificate. But you can add that instrument rating onto that, so you can immediately go and get that instrument rating. To get your commercial pilot certificate, now the age limit is you have to be at least 18 years old. You have to be able to know English, go and do the knowledge test, the written knowledge test, receive the flight training, meet the aeronautical experience, and take a check ride. Pretty much the same list of things as the other ones. gets a little repetitive. Then we have our privileges and limitations. So similar to the private pilot one, this one says you can now act as pilot in command or PIC for compensation or hire. So the other one was you couldn't for compensation or hire. This one, now you can. There's a list of exceptions, and that's a big part of what the ground portion of your check ride on for this one is going over what you can and cannot be compensated for. Again, this is stuff you'll go over in actual training, but I just want to, for those thinking, oh, I'll go get my commercial pilot certificate so I can charge my friends for flying. You can't do that. It's a lot more complicated than that, and if you want, you can look it up there in 621-133. It's for free online on the FAA's website. You can find the Code of Federal Regulations, and you can look that up, and you can try to find any exceptions. Everybody, whenever they're going for it, always tries to find, oh, what's like the loophole, how I'm going to be able to make money doing this. They've kind of thought it through. Everyone does it, but hey, it's fun. Then we go to our aeronautical experience. All right. So for a commercial pilot, so this is the first picture where that one was not me flying it, unfortunately. So I did this one just to kind of think, where it's a commercial operation, but still typically going to be a little smaller operation, for things than what you would need the airline license for. So for a commercial license, that hour requirement jumps up to 250 hours of total time. So when you got your private, let's say you got your private pilot's license at the minimum of 40 hours. Of those 40 hours, you already had, 10 hours of solo, and so you already had some of that time you needed for the 50 that you needed to get your instrument rating. So maybe it was another 40 hours that you took to get your instrument rating. If you did it in the minimums, let's just say you got your private and your instrument rating all at about 80 hours. You're gonna need a lot more time before you can get your commercial pilot certificate. So that's why it's recommended to get the instrument rating before getting this, because all of that instrument time that you're doing can now count towards your commercial. And so it's a little more efficient with your money if you do it in this order. Of those 250 total time, I don't have it on here, 50 hours can be credited using a flight simulator, but it has to be, there's a whole thing that explains that it can't just be like, oh, I got Microsoft Flight Sim on my computer at home, I'm gonna use that, or on the Xbox or something, or PlayStation. No, it has to be like certified by the FAA to be able to use it. That being said, they're not super uncommon. Most flight schools have a flight simulator. That doesn't mean it's a full motion. Those are a little different, a full motion flight simulator. Usually it means that it's actually gonna be able to be used for flight training, and you can credit 50 of those hours, meaning you'd only have to spend 200 hours in the air to get your commercial pilot certificate. And when it costs, it's a little pricey flying, and so it's nice to be able to subsidize at least 50 hours, paying the cheaper fees of a flight sim than for all the stuff in the air. Of those 250 hours, 100 of those hours are required to be pilot in command time, so you acting as PIC. Of those 100 hours of you acting as PIC, at least 50 hours need to be cross-country, so you need to have 50 hours cross-country PIC time. I know, I'm saying a lot of acronyms here. Then you have to have, of those 250, 20 hours of dual, so that's instruction received with a flight instructor. Of those 20 hours, 10 hours need to be instrument training. If you got your instrument rating, hey, guess what? You're gonna more than meet that 10-hour requirement. At least 10 hours are required to be either in a complex, turbine, or TAA airplane. So TAA is technically advanced aircraft. So that's where it has a little, like a digital primary flight display. The instruments in the would be a little more advanced and has autopilot. Most people will do either complex or TAA because it's more economical than training in a turbine plane, but you can get those 10 hours if you need to. You are also required to do 1 2-hour cross-country day flight that is over 100 nautical miles and 1 2-hour cross-country night flight that's over 100 nautical miles. Most people, what they'll do is they'll fly out 2 hours, then wait till after, till it's night, and then they'll do that same thing coming right back, and so then they knock both those out pretty much at the same time. Then you're also required 3 hours of check ride prep. Then we get to the next section. Of those 250 hours, there is a 10-hour solo or duties of PIC, pilot in command. So the FAA has allowed for an exception where you can have a flight instructor with you during these solo hours if the instructor isn't actually providing any instruction. They're just there. Should an emergency arise, they can kind of help out, but they're just kind of there for safety reasons, but they're not doing anything. They're just like a passenger, and you are acting as the pilot in command as if you were solo. Of those 10 hours of solo or duties of PIC, you do have your long cross country that you got to do. So that's one cross country over 300 nautical miles with landings at 3 points, and it has to be at least 250 nautical miles from your departure point to wherever you go to. Then of those 10 hours of solo, you are required 5 hours of night flying with at least 10 takeoff and landings at an operating control tower. So the control tower has to be open because there are some that close at night. So you have to make sure you do it at the right airport. All right, we are almost there. So that is what it takes to get a commercial pilot certificate. I know I talked a lot and said a lot of things there, but it's really not too much when you look at it that way. However, oh, there's another slide. What is that? That's because if you want to keep going after your commercial pilot certificate, there is working towards getting your ATP or airline transport pilot certificate. Oops, I went past it, didn't I? I went twice. What is that? Okay. So this one has a little different stuff. Eligibility, you gotta be at least 23. They added some things. You have to be of good moral character. You have to have a commercial pilot certificate with an instrument rating. You have to take knowledge tests and pass it, receive all the other training and check ride. And the privileges and limitations, same as a commercial pilot with an instrument rating, with a few exceptions that you can look up there. The hour requirement for this one. So the reason I include this is just to kind of show a couple little things, and then I'll go back. 1,500 hours. Wow, that's quite the jump from the 250 of a commercial pilot. So if you're planning on going to an airline, we can see the progression of the airplanes as they go, getting bigger and bigger. 1,500 hours, that's a lot. So there are lots of different routes that people take if they want to get to an airline. Once you get your, commercial pilot certificate, some people become instructors and they instruct while getting those hours. Some people might go and get a job flying, doing survey stuff or doing, who knows what, doing different things, or they might just be paying out of pocket to just go fly for fun until they get all of those hours that they need to do. And so that's why there's that bit of a jump, but they do require a lot more because at this point you're carrying all these passengers. They're going to be a lot more stringent on what they have. Of those 1,500 hours, you'll have to have at least 500 hours of cross-country time, 100 hours at night, which has a few little caveats there in it, 50 hours in the plane that you're going to be using for the check ride, 75 hours of instrument, and 250 hours as the PIC. There is another caveat that if you were to get like a job for flying something where it requires 2 pilots, you can be logging SIC, second in command, for certain parts. But again, that's all stuff that you can get into at that point. For the most part, what people really need to worry about is getting to their commercial pilot's license or commercial pilot certificate. At that point, then there's a lot more that they can do, and then they can keep going. They can get a career there, or they can go on to an airline depending on what they want. So that's it for my slideshow that I had there. I don't know if anybody had any questions or comments. No? All right. Well, thank you for coming and for listening. I hope it was educational and that people learned something.
Yeah,
Thank you, Daniel.
All right.
thank you.